All right. Thank you, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here on this stage again. Like last time I was here with React Live, maybe some of you were there as well. I was actually the MC at that one, so it's nice to be here in a different role. Hi, my name is Gert Hengeveld. I'm a staff software engineer at Chromatic, and I work on both Chromatic, a SaaS service, and Storybook, an open source project. So, who of you remember working like this? You are working on a web app, but in order to do that, you have to first spin up the entire platform. Maybe microservices platform if you're unlucky. You have to recompile your code with every change that you make. When designers review your stuff 2 weeks later, they always find new things that you need to tweak and change. And that means that you have to rework stuff that's already shipped. So these days, we build front ends and user interfaces differently. We assemble user interfaces from existing components. We try to reuse those components, the ones that we already have, as much as possible. We do that for efficiency's sake. It's just more efficient to reuse what you've already built than to reinvent the wheel all the time. It's also can be more speedy if you are able to parallelize the work across multiple teams. A lot of companies these days have dedicated teams to build out a component library or design system, if you will, and other teams that consume those components, that design system, in the apps that they're actually building. This also improves quality because it's you're able to verify, or you will be verifying that the components that you build are working in various environments. So they get hammered more, right? There's more eyeballs on it, so it's more likely to actually be correct. And also, maintenance becomes easier because if you work on isolated components, it's easier to focus on the one thing at hand and not have to consider the entire context of a running app around it. So this is where Storybook comes in. Storybook, just a quick question, who here uses Storybook? A lot of fans in the room, I hope. I hope you're all fans. I know I am. There's also a lot of haters out there, by the way, because this is open source, right? But still, so Storybook, for those who don't know, it's basically a web app that you spin up on your local machine, on your local host, and it's a tool for building user interfaces, like user interface components in isolation. So you get this little canvas where you render just one component, say a button or whatever. This is a skeleton screen for a profile page. You can build entire pages, and you basically use it side by side with your IDE or code editor. You then catalog all the various components and states that you have in your system, and that way you can also document your component library. So Storybook offers some add-ons to make that easier. So the general concept in Storybook is a story, and this is what a story in code looks like. So say you have a badge component. This is a React example. You import this React badge component, and you define a set of metadata for it. So it's saying, okay, I'm defining a story file for a badge component. It gets some default args in here, and I have two variants, right? Two stories, a small one and a large one, right? It's a badge, and like it can be smaller or bigger. This is a very trivial example, of course, but you can take this all the way. And notice that this code is not React specific, even though it is for a React component. That is intentional. In Storybook, Storybook works with basically all the frameworks out there, all the libraries. So it's not just React, it's also Vue and Angular and whatnot. And we want this such a story file to be framework agnostic, if you will. So what then would you define a story for? Well, of course, there's the various states that your component might have, like a loading state, disabled, in progress, whatever. And then there's edge cases that you can cater to, right? What happens if I have a very long text in my button? Does it flow? How does it wrap, like text wrap and that sort of thing? So as a front-end developer, you always have to deal with that sort of thing, right? And then there's context. Say I'm signed in, signed out, or I have a different language. What happens? Right? What happens if it's like right to left rather than left to right? And then it gets more complicated in being that there are countless combinations possible of all these various situations. So that's what Storybook attempts to help you with, to catalog all of these various things. And then there's UI development on a bigger picture, right? So Storybook is a tool for UI development, and we of course also consider the fact that it's a team effort, right? It's not just typically not just a single developer working in an attic somewhere. You are collaborating with designers who want to make corrections all the time. You are collaborating with testers that do QA, and that should actually be done during the development cycle, but typically happens after the fact when it's shipped to production already. There's product owners or managers who want to check on the deliverables, like did you actually deliver what we discussed that you would deliver? And of course, everyone on the team and other stakeholders want to be aware of what's out there, what have we already shipped, and maybe people on another team want to know that I just built an accordion component and can reuse it now. So sharing is essential to this whole workflow, right? It's super important, and that's why in Storybook we have built a set of features that allow you to share your stories and your components with other people. So one of them is, the most trivial one is like Storybook provides a command that you can run. It's called build storybook. So you just do npm run build storybook or yarn build storybook, and it gives you a statically exported version of your storybook. It's basically a folder with some HTML files and a bunch of JavaScript files in there, and you can upload it anywhere, right? Put it on GitHub Pages or Netlify or whatever you want, or publish it to Chromatic. So obviously I work for Chromatic. I'll get to some of that later. And you can share a link to that uploaded artifact with your stakeholders, so they can take a look at it on their own machine, play around, because it's like stories are like interactive, play around with it and verify that that is what they had in mind when they conjured it up. And of course, collaborate to review the very specific states. So you can have a discussion maybe on Slack or wherever about what you've built. So Chromatic is a platform, a service on top of Storybook. You can upload your stories to Chromatic, and it basically gives you a library of your components. So this is in essence what that looks like. You just run npx Chromatic in your Storybook project, and it goes off and it builds this static storybook with build storybook, and it verifies your stories, uploads the whole thing, and bam, I get a library with all my components in there. So Chromatic takes screenshots of all your components in your storybook so that you get this nice little library here. And then you can click View Storybook, and bam, there I have it. This is my hosted storybook. Nice thing about Chromatic, and that's like a benefit on top of like GitHub Pages or whatnot, is that this is also behind authentication. So if you have a private repository on GitHub, your storybook will also be securely served behind authentication through GitHub. Another extension that we are offering now is integration with Figma. So there is a Figma add-on called Storybook Connect that designers can install in their Figma environment so that they can interactively inspect the live story as it is published in a storybook alongside the design. So here on the right-hand side, you select a layer in Figma, and there is a story tied to that layer that is rendered in this modal on the left-hand side. And you can actually then play around with that thing to, for example, inspect sizing of the component and to verify whether or not this thing was developed pixel perfect, if that is what you care about, right? Or is it responsive or whatever. Here's another example. You can use the accessibility add-on in Storybook to verify what the component looks like when you have blurred vision or you are colorblind, for example. So the third way to share your components and your stories is to embed them in other places around on the web. So you can simply take a Storybook URL as it is published on Chromatic. You can copy that URL and paste it into a Medium blog post that you're writing, or a Notion document, or other places that support the embed standard. So what we do is we automatically convert that into an iframe embed, and automatically also dynamically adjust the height of that iframe so that it fits with the component. So, for example, a button is like 40 pixels tall or 60 pixels tall, but an entire page might be 1200 pixels tall. Would be convenient if the iframe would dynamically scale along with that. So this is what that looks like, for example, on Medium. This is actually let me scroll. So here, I'm authoring a blog post. I'm pasting a URL, press enter, and bam, I have a live interactive story in my Medium blog post. So imagine the possibilities. You could do anything with that, right? And then number 4 is something that's coming up, and it's come up in the past as a request by a lot of companies, is we want to style our storybook in a particular way, because we use our storybook as a documentation website. We publish it on a web, right? But we want it to look good. We want it to match our brand, right? Well, you can tweak the styling of Storybook in certain ways, change the logo, change the colors. Sure, it's all possible. I've seen really crazy things. But wouldn't it be convenient if you could just extract those docs pages that you have in Storybook and put them in a custom-built website? So that is Storybook Docs 2.0, which is coming. It basically allows you to take the MDX pages that you've written for Storybook and throw them into a Next.js or a Gatsby site or a Nuxt or whatever static site generation system you are using. So now we come to like the second thing that's really hard and that's super important for front-end developers is testing. Testing UI code is super hard, right? Because components, they always break in unexpected places, right? You use a component in 50 different places, and you make a very trivial change to that component, and then it always breaks in one of those 50 cases, right? Testing all of those scenarios where you're using it is a lot of work, and basically impossible to do that all manually. And reproducing a specific state, so say you have a live web app with an actual database running behind it, well, it's pretty hard to trigger like an error state, for example. How do you reproduce a particular state that maybe a customer reported the user interface is broken in this particular situation? But unfortunately, your customers, they have very high expectations these days, right? People are all used to, well, basically the way that Apple builds their software. It's always super slick and it works the same way everywhere, and it hopefully typically never breaks, right? So customers have a very high bar these days. It's way harder than it used to be in the past. So testing for a front-end developer is crucial if you're building software that needs to be reliable and always work. So that's why in Storybook we've introduced with 6.4 interactive stories. It was a top request by the community, and basically what it allows you to do is define a play function on your story that is a function that gets executed as soon as the story is rendered in your browser. And then you can use that to build more complex stories for complex components and pages, like get your story in a state that you can only reach by clicking here, clicking there, typing in some text, right? And so you can now simulate user behavior directly in your browser, such as typing in text into an input box and clicking a button. That's powered by testing library, so we didn't reinvent the wheel here. We're just standing on the shoulders of giants and basically using what they have already built, and is proven, and it's also very popular. So testing library is very popular. So these interactive stories, they run in any browser, right? You don't need to spin up a particular piece of software. It just runs in a browser that you're already using to visit your Storybook. And the nice thing about this is you also get like a log of all the interactions that you have, so that you can actually step through those things. Here's what that looks like in code. So you have a story. It's called submitted for a component, for a search form component. And what we've just done is add a play function on it. It's an async function, and in there you can run particular events. You can simulate events, such as typing and clicking. So this is probably very familiar to people who've written end-to-end tests or integration tests in the past, but with other tools, it's just very, very similar. But it's now possible to do it directly in your storybook as you're working on your stories. On top of this, we've also introduced interaction testing, or we are also introducing interaction testing with Storybook 6.5. So this gives you assertions powered by Jest. So it's everything that you already are familiar with if you're using Jest. But it gives you an in-browser debugger. So as you have your story in front of you, it runs these interactions, but you can also use your regular browser DevTools to debug individual states. You can step back and forth between the various steps in your list of interactions, and like do things like inspect element, add any step, any state of any part of those steps. We've also built a Node.js test runner that you can run in like your CI environment, for example, so that you can run all of those tests in one go in your CI environment in a headless browser. That's by the way powered by Playwright. So again, standing on the shoulders of giants here. And a very nice thing is that what you may be familiar with is, say you've used Selenium in the past, and you're running some tests, you're running a set of interactions, and then Selenium basically crashes because it says, oh, this element is not available right now. We're not able to click on this button because it does not exist. So what Selenium gives you is basically a blob of HTML, and if you're unlucky, there's also SVG stuff in there, like a very long string, essentially, of the current state of the HTML, and then it's up to you to figure it out. Well, what we give you is a URL that you can just click, and it opens up your storybook exactly at that state, and you can then use the browser DevTools to figure out what the hell was wrong. So this is what that looks like. Again, we have the same play function, and the only thing we add assertions. So expect is coming from Jest. We did not reinvent the wheel. And a nice thing is that we also automatically spy on any actions that you've defined. So actions is this concept in Storybook for like button clicks and such that we mock them out. So we also spy on them so that we can track, oh, did that unsubmit handler actually get invoked when the button was clicked? So all of this is possible in Storybook 6.5, and that unlocks a whole lot of new superpowers. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this.